Coming up, Joan Miro's Organic Shapes. Hi, and welcome to another edition of The Amazing Art Show. I'm your host, Angie Beam, and we are ready to get started today on some great looking art. Your supplies today, pretty simple, nothing too crazy. These are the liquid watercolors. We've used these before. I've just diluted them just a tad bit in some water. You know, typically they kind of come in those little bottles. They're already liquid. If you don't have this though, you can use any kind of paint. It could be, you know, acrylic, watercolor, whatever you would like. Water, obviously, brushes, pencil, ruler, and then kind of another thing, it's not very weird. You can find it pretty much anywhere, but it is block printing ink. And it is just a super black, kind of dark ink. And then also you will need a brayer, which is one of these things that will help us to apply the ink where we are going to be putting it today. All right, so I think we are ready. As far as paper goes, you can really work any size paper you would like to. You do need white though. And our artist that we are looking at today is Joan Miro. The thing that I want you kind of to think about Joan Miro is that he had this really great way of looking at things, and he used these very unusual, you know, crazy kind of silly shapes, very organic shapes. So they're not, you know, you're not going to see a whole lot of geometric shapes in his work. You're not going to see a whole lot of sharp edges and, you know, really sharp points. You're going to see a lot of very imaginative, geometric, no, not geometric, organic looking shapes. So, you know, for example, you'll see, you know, something like this one that we're looking at here. It's very unusual. It's very organic looking. And then, you know, you also will notice, and especially in this particular piece that we're looking at, he typically used a lot of blue, red, yellow, and black. Now, I'm not going to limit you today to your colors, so you can do that if you would like to. I'm not going to be doing that, but it is something that Joan Miro really liked to do a lot. So I want us to keep in mind those organic shapes, and I want you to think really kind of fun and whimsical and silly kind of shapes on your paper today. All right, so let's get started, and I would like for you to start with the ruler, and I would like for you to start by creating a border that goes all the way around the edges of your work, and it is up to you as to how big or small you would like to create that border. I think I'm going to actually use just the width of my ruler, which is not quite an inch, but close. And I'm going to, we've talked about this before, but let me just reiterate. We're going to line up the ruler with the very edge of our paper, and then I'm going to take my thumb and spread it all the way down to the bottom, my index finger up at the very, very top, and then I'm going to push down with my muscles so that it's not sliding all around. And I'm just going to give myself a light little pencil line, and then I'm going to continue to do that all the way around. And obviously, in places where my ruler isn't long enough, I will have to move it up a little bit. That throws off some of my kids sometimes. Well, my ruler isn't long enough, Miss Angie. Well, you have to move your ruler up a little bit. And then once you get it on there, make sure that you get it lined back up with what your line was originally. And as you're kind of working on your border, which is pretty easy and it doesn't take too much thought, I would like for you to be kind of thinking about some of those organic kind of shapes that you might like to use in your work. So my kids and I, we've been talking a lot about organic shapes and geometric shapes, and so this is one lesson that we were doing to really try and kind of grasp the idea of organic shapes, because Joan Miro was great about getting those really nice organic looking shapes. And we talked about that organic shapes, you find them a lot in nature. And we also, I've got Def Ed, and we were talking about how there wasn't really a word or a sign word for organic, so we actually signed it as silly shapes. And so once I thought about that, I was like, well, they are kind of silly looking shapes. So we started talking to them, you know, talking about that they were silly shapes, and that you know, help the kids a lot. Help to kind of remember what they look like. All right, so we're going to start out with some of those silly organic shapes. Joan Miro would take these shapes and it was, I always like looking at the titles of his work because it can be something totally crazy and then you look at it and it's like woman in a chair and doesn't look anything like that, but that was his interpretation of it, and it was very, you know, abstract and very, very much from his imagination. And he would also use lots of just plain, you know, kind of lines in his work. And I'm going to do some that kind of start like a circle, but I'm not going to make them exactly like a circle because we're doing organic shapes. And don't forget, it would also be another really good idea. You might want to think about incorporating some overlapping. So if you're going to be doing that, you might want to think about, you can either draw it on top of the shape, like I could do it here, and then erase whatever it is that I don't want. Or I can, I'm trying to decide if I want that to be on the top or the bottom. I think I want it to be on the bottom. Erase what you don't need and go from there, or you can just draw it without going across it. All right, so I've got my organic shapes, and I've got two shapes here. I've got three kind of carrying your eye down this direction and then one here. So I've got a pretty good balance, and I think I'm going to stop there. However, I am going to do maybe just some interesting lines in my work. So when we looked at the piece of artwork before, you know, they had these weird little lines that kind of shot off of shapes and made some funny little marks. So I'm going to do a couple of those. And let me see here. I'm trying to decide what I would like that one to do. And they can be thick lines, or you can make them thin lines. I'm going to make that one kind of a thicker line. Almost kind of turns it into a shape. And then I think I'm going to do some here. All right, so I'm done with that main part. The next thing that I would like for you to do is you are going to outline everything with a black marker. It does need to be a permanent marker since you're going to be doing, well, I say that. If you're going to be doing a watercolor, it needs to be a permanent marker. If it's not a watercolor, then you can do, you know, any kind of marker really would work just fine. So you're going to outline everything, and then the next thing that I want you to do once you get it outlined is I want you to take your Elmer's glue, and this is going to sound weird, and you are going to draw back over your lines with the Elmer's glue. So you're going to, and I don't have one that just has the Elmer's glue, but let's say that I've got my piece and I've got everything on there that I want to have, and all I'm going to do is just take my bottle of glue and you're just going to run it down over on top of all of your lines. All right, so once you've done that, obviously you're going to need to let it dry, and then once you've done that, you can start the color part. So I want you to think about, as far as color goes, you know, we want to make it really, really nice and bright and colorful. And these liquid watercolors, remember that you do not have to add more water to them. If you don't want to, you can obviously if you do want to. Let me think. I'm trying to decide where I'm going to start. I'm going to start here, I guess. I've got my paper upside down, but that's okay. And typically, Joan Miro wouldn't have quite as much going on in his picture as I do in this one, but Joan Miro was kind of a minimalist. He really liked things very simple and not a lot to it, but it made a statement. And I am a little more, I like a little more things in my artwork. So even though we're using Joan Miro as our artist that we're referring to and we're talking to, it doesn't mean that you can't have your own style for sure. Because Joan Miro would want you to have your own imagination and do your own things for sure. I'm going to leave this a little bit of white left showing, and I'm actually going to come in with a tad bit of kind of a magenta purple color, and I'm just going to kind of set it down inside there so that those can kind of blend. If you are doing a watercolor, you might want to do that as well, as far as having some colors that can blend together to add interest to your picture. You can also come back in and kind of spot some around in there if you would like to. And what I want you to really remember is I want these to be really, really bright and full of color, and you do not want to leave any areas white. Everything needs to be painted. So kind of keep that in mind, because you're going to need, you know, eventually you're going to come to the part where you've painted almost all of your shapes. And I did, in this particular example that we're looking at, I did include some geometric shapes as well as some freeform, organic looking kind of shapes as well. Some of my other examples that I'm going to show you here in a minute have more organic and less, you know, geometric kind of shapes. I want you to think about incorporating lots of color. And as far as your oh, what was I going to say? As far as your palette goes, you know, it's kind of the more color the better. But you're going to kind of use all of your colors, and you're going to eventually come to a spot where you've got just kind of background area left, and you need to be able to kind of figure out what you're going to put in that area. So don't paint yourself into a corner, as they say. Kind of have a game plan, but be flexible, because that's what art's about. You have to be flexible, because it may not always work out the way you want it to, which personally is one of the things I really like about art. So you're going to continue with your color, and remember that once you get this part dry, and remember that you've done the glue, and the glue is dry, you're going to have to give it another, you know, this a little bit longer to dry as well. It will not take nearly as long as the glue takes to dry, though. And your bead of glue, as you would say, whenever you do like a string or a line of glue, they call that your line of glue, or your bead of glue. It's going to be, you don't want it like super globby, but you do want it kind of thick. It's kind of hard to describe. You don't want it super thin, for sure. And I'll kind of show you here in a minute why we're doing that, and the difference between doing it thick and doing it thin. You want it just kind of medium, somewhere in the middle there. And I am just kind of laying out my color. And right now my paper is getting kind of spotty, but when it dries, it will not have those little spots on it. Although I'm kind of digging the spots. I like those a little bit. All right, so I'm going to put this one to the side, and I'm going to show you one that I've already been working on. And I explained to you that it was going to have, you know, a lot more of the organic kind of shapes. So you see a lot of those shapes in here, and you see everything is, you know, outlined. And I have actually added glue to parts of this one, and it's very hard to see on TV, but you could see it. But I've done, you know, this one is super, super thick, and then this one over here is a little bit thinner. And so the next part of our project is, this is, I think, the most fun part. So not that adding the color isn't super, super fun, but the next part I think is one of my favorites. So once your glue is dried, your paint is dried, you're ready to go on to the cool part. So the cool part is going to be doing the that ink that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to move this off of here so that I have my plate to print on. And you are going to need, and it doesn't take very much of this, you're going to just, you can scoop it out with a spoon, or you can scoop it out with a knife, and it's just kind of globby. And usually what I do is I take it and just kind of spread it out from one side of the tray to the next. Yeah, kind of looks, you know, like peanut butter or fudge. It kind of reminds me of chocolate fudge. So you want it just kind of an even amount, and you're going to take your brayer and you're going to put your brayer into the ink. So you're going to dab it in the ink, dab it. Once you start getting a little bit of it on there, so I'm just putting it in the ink and then I pull it off, and then I'm going to keep rolling it. I'm going to get a little more. My brayer is very squeaky. It's kind of like my voice this week. Get a little bit more. And if you can hear it, besides the squeak, there's this little, I'm going to lean in so you can kind of hear it. There's this kind of, sounds kind of sticky. That's the sound you want. If it's not sounding sticky, that means you have too much ink. And it's very possible to have too much ink and you don't want too much. So if it's not sounding kind of sticky, like that, then you've probably got too much ink, and you probably need to maybe move over to another plate and ink up again so that you have this on another plate but not quite as much of the ink. So once you have got it sounding about like that, and I usually go, you know, I roll vertically and then I also roll horizontally, and then that just assures that you've got, you know, a good equal amount of ink on the brayer. So you are going to, and I've got one of these that is glued, but it's not been inked yet. So let me show you this one. This is one of my art students, Kennedy, and she did not get hers inked yet, and I told her that I would do it for her. So she doesn't know it yet, but hers is on TV, and it's being inked on TV. So don't scream, Kennedy. It's going to be okay. All right, so we are going to ink up Kennedy's piece of art. So you can, if you would like to, I painted on this other one that I was showing you. You know, I painted my border. She did not paint her border, and you could do it either way. And as far as your inking goes, if you want to start out on the edges, you can start out on the edges, or if you want to try to start more within, you know, within this area instead of out here in your border, that's your call as well. And I don't know which one I'm going to do. I'm going to wing it. So I'm going to start. And you want to start with a pretty light hand, which means you're not going to, with all your muscles. You're going to just, it's really light, all right? So I'm going to try to do it just within the main part of hers, which is going to be tricky. So here we go. And I've already done the glue, and it's already dry. So that's already on here, even though it's a little hard to see. All right, so we're going to lay it down, and I'm just going to lightly begin to roll. And I'm going to roll from start to finish. And then when I get there, I'm going to stop. All right. And then I'm going to ink up again. So I'm going to get a little more ink, not a lot, just a little bit. And I'm going to roll again. And I'm listening for that sticky sound. And then I'm ready to go again. I'm going to scoot over this time. You can kind of see the end, the edge of the brayer right there. So I want to make sure that I right in that same area, and I'm not pressing down too hard, just a little bit. Get more ink. Roll over this direction again. I want to overlap just a tad bit. Now the glue, we talked about the glue. The ink is going to want to stick in those places where you have glue. So where you've done glue really, really thick, you're going to get some nice, really thick lines. So her glue is a little thicker right over in this area, but it's a little thinner kind of over in this area because you'll see it didn't really stick in those areas. Now, if you've got a particular area that you want to go back and hit again, you can just be really, really light with the brayer and try to kind of go over those areas again if you need to. You don't want your whole picture to be black. You just want, you want to just kind of highlight, you know, a couple little areas. So I'm going to try to get right in there a little bit. All right. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to show you on mine. Mine's not all glued, but I'm going to show you what this one's going to look like since I did do that one really thick. All right, so I'm going to ink up again. And this ink will dry. So if you happen to start to ink and you need to leave and come back, you'll put a little piece of saran wrap or something over that. It'll help. And I'm starting to get not very sticky sounding, so I'm going to add a little bit more. That's sounding better. All right, you ready? Okay. Since I haven't done the whole thing, I'm just going to kind of roll here and then I'm going to stop. So I'm going to roll here. And I'm going to stop there. All right, so you can see that my little arrow is really starting to kind of stand out and pick up those lines. And you can see that it's a little bit thicker. So if you want to do your lines a little bit thicker with the glue, you're going to get a thicker, you know, line with the ink. So kind of keep that in mind and see how, you know, have some variety. You don't want it all to look exactly the same, but you do want, you know, you do want to have some differences in there, but not so many. You don't want your whole thing to be black, so kind of think about that. So while I continue working on these, let's go to today's quote. Our art quote comes from our featured artist, Spanish painter, sculptor, and ceramist, Joan Miro. I try to apply colors like words that shape poems, like notes that shape music. All right, guys, so we are just about done for today. We've had a short project today. It's one of those projects that goes faster on TV than it does in real life. But I wanted to show you, I want to leave you with a couple examples today. So I showed you Kennedy's and how that one ended up looking. And then I've got a couple others that I brought students of mine that are finished. So I'll show these to you guys. There's another one. I love the colors on here. And let's see. This is Mariana's. Very nice job. And then this person, I brought this one because they did such really nice, thick glue lines. You can see the difference between the glue lines and between Mariana's and between Menar's. She's got those really nice thick glue lines. So it's just a different look. You know, it's just, it's up to your individual opinion. So there's that one. Some nice organic looking shapes in there. I really like this one there. And then even more than that, this is Cameron's, and her glue lines are super, super thick. She did a nice job. These kind of, this one especially kind of reminds me of stained glass. Kind of has that look to it. So it might be kind of a nice holiday project even if you wanted to do something like that for mom or dad, grandma, grandpa. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Now go out and make some amazing art.